welcome back to another video. My name is Michael and I am a sound designer at Riot Games. And in this video, I'll be sharing more about how I created this thruster engine sound using different source that I found at home and also a commercial recording of a tiger. I'm going to be talking about why I chose to record these specific sound sources and also show you exactly what I did in terms of processing and editing and mastering to get it to that final product. To start off, I'm gonna break down a little bit of this video and share a little bit of how I initially approached what sounds do I record and the different elements that I was looking for. As you can see in this redesign here, the different sections are labeled by different colors. I've broken down into a charge up, the boost, the momentary stop, and finally like the second boost that the robot does. So to start off, I'm just gonna solo the video without any sound. For this initial charge up part, I wanted this charge to feel very impactful because the camera kind of zooms in on the robot and you can see like the engine visually flares up with all this firepower. So I kind of really wanted to have something that felt big and cinematic. And after that, we have the actual boost. As you can see, there's like a really brief streak of orange VFX. And immediately my mind just goes like, okay, there has to be some kind of transient to kind of highlight and accentuate that impact. It also kind of covers the sound of the engine when it's flying through the air. In this situation, we see that the robot goes from left to right. How can we represent that with sound? And finally, he does this like momentary stop mid-air. Just looking at the visuals as well, it looks like he slows down in speed a lot. So it's important to kind of convey this moment. Almost make it feel like it's kind of like a sudden stop. And finally, at the end here, we have a bit more of that upwards thrust motion with the robot. So now to explain a little bit of the source material that I choose to record at home. Here we have my stove. And this entire video idea actually came to me when I was cooking. So I was making some soup one day. And you know how when you turn on the stove, the fire usually doesn't make a very loud sound. It's almost like muted. But what I found was really interesting was when I accidentally spilt a little bit of the soup onto the stovetop. And I realized that it created this really aggressive sounding fire, like it's kind of burning up rapidly. So I was like, wait, why don't I try to fit this in a redesign and see where I can take this kind of sound? So we also have the washing machine here. And also the sound of my vacuum cleaner. The kind of thinking behind these two sources was, all right, now I have that kind of main fire element, but what I found that fire tends to get noisy really easily, and to give it interest, you need to have some kind of tonal movement. So I was thinking, okay, what kind of sounds do I have at home that could get me close to that sci-fi tonal movement? When I think of tonal in this situation, I'm not really necessarily thinking of metal ring outs, glass ring outs. Synthesis could work in this situation, but I wanted to approach this with a more organic and natural source and just use stuff that everyone has access to in their homes. Up next, we have some leather jacket rustles. And the thinking behind this was to create a transient, or the robot kind of propels forward. Next, we have bounty paper towels. The thinking behind this was to give that buyer a bit more aggression through these small transients. Finally, we have a recording of a tiger growl. Shout out to Boom Library. They make really good source material sounds. It's super well recorded and cleaned, and it's straight out of the box ready for processing or even just drag and drop in some other cases. So before I kind of dive into each of these recordings and the processing and the whatnot, I wanted to say a quick thank you for all the positive feedback, support, and love on the last two tutorial videos I made. It's a lot of fun making these videos, and I'm so glad that it's able to kind of help you in some way, even if it's just what a sound designer does on a day-to-day basis. Cool. So going into the first recording, we have, it's not a drill, it's a vacuum cleaner. I don't know why. Like, I heard it, but then I didn't have the video and I thought it was a drill. But this is the vacuum cleaner. So as you can hear, it's not like the perfect recording. There's a bit of me talking in there. And what I was really looking for is just like that rising tonality in the tail. I just really wanted a good recording of that. So a bit of noise reduction just to get rid of some of the background noise. Already like this tonal riser moment is already a lot cleaner. And from this point, it's just kind of enhancing that a bit more. So some limiting is pretty aggressive. I wanted to capture all the little details. Some R3000 harmonizer to give it some more warmth. Oxford inflator, just loudness in general. Here we have manipulator. I love this plugin. It does a lot of really cool things, and it's great for sci-fi stuff. Yeah, so here we have some disperser, some hyperdimension compressor, which is OTT settings, and a bit of EQ. This just kind of helps give it more of that wideness. So we rendered it out, and I also added a bit of entropy EQ, which is a noise reduction plugin, and it enhances the tonal elements in the sound, as well as some bass XXL, which adds harmonics above that fundamental frequency, which gives the illusion that you have more bass. So here is the sound in action, a bit more of that tremulation. This is also reversed, so instead of pitching down, it pitches up. So that's kind of one layer in that charge up. That layer is also used here at that sudden stop movement. This is just to give the feeling that, okay, something is powering down. Cool, so next we have the leather jacket here. As I mentioned before, the main idea is just to get some kind of cool transient. So we have a limiter to catch some of the peaks, and RX denoise and de-reverb. So here's just a sound rendered out. So we have some more denoising. I'll put in later here, give it more loudness, and I think this is the main heavy hitter for this sound here. Important thing to note too, if you have these two sidechain boxes checked, it actually reroutes that original sound back into the plugin as the modulator. So at this point, I feel like we already have the tail of that sound, but we still need to get that initial impact. Here it's just a bit more cleaning, tame some of the low end, some more saturation, and yeah, render that out. So it's a cool sound. It's a very textural sound. It's very wet, warbly, but it's not an impact. Here, we're going to be adding some impact into the sound. So more saturation. They really bring out that high end, because what I found, and once you use M vocoder, it gets rid of a lot of the high end. Some limiting, some more loudness, and enforcer. This is like kind of like the heavy hitter for this sound. So this is a really cool plugin by Boom Library. It essentially adds a transient sample to your sound. There's definitely some usable stuff here. I did a bit more of transient shaping to really get that punch. Some flanger for tonality. So we're almost there. I think once you got to this point, I felt that transient and the leather jacket tail sound, it sounded a bit disconnected to me. So I did some compression here just to get that to fit together a bit better. And to show you where I used that. So there's a little bit of extra processing here, and it's just some simple transient shaping as well as taming some low end hit. So you have all these hits combined. And if you've watched my previous video about, how to create explosions, I shared a tip staggering multiple transients to make the hit feel bigger. And in this situation, that is an example of where that kind of idea can be applied. Use it here as well. Final propulsion. Cool, so that's it for the leather jacket sound. Next we have the washing machine. This is what it sounds like. So the idea behind the processing here was just to kind of bring out the tonal elements and get rid of some of the noise. So here we have spectral denoise, H2000, Oxford inflator, M ratio, different manipulator preset. So let me see. I also almost hear even some kind of overtones. Some more limiting to bring it up, and fresh air. Yeah, there's nothing too fancy with this sound. I just wanted to do some simple touches to kind of bring out the tonal element here. Some more noise reduction. As you can tell, I kind of retained a lot of like that original element of the washing machine. It just feels a little bit more polished. So I used it over here, and this is when the robot's flying through the air. Oh, and this just has tremulator. It's a pretty subtle layer, but if it's gone, you kind of notice it. I think it both sounds cool, but in my designs, I just like a bit more kind of uniqueness. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the fire sound, which is the main body of like that robot thruster. As mentioned before, this whole idea actually came from when I was cooking and I accidentally spilled a little bit of soup on the gas stove. The recording sounds like this. It has this like really visceral element to it, which I really like. Unfortunately, I think the position of the mic was a little higher, so I wasn't able to record a lot of the low end of the sound. So all of the processing here is mainly trying to artificially add back in that low end. It's always some kind of spectral denoise just to get cleaned up a little bit, some limiting to really bring out the little details. Some bass XXL here to add some of that low end back in. And we also have entropy here to also get rid of some of that noise that was building up. So even just comparing this stage of processing to the original recording, you already hear that it's feeling a lot more fuller across the frequency spectrum. Now you have like this really cool sustain layer. Now I just wanted to make some whooshes out of it so that it can also match some of the movements that the robot was doing. Whoosh here, I set it to manual mode. So play with some of that and use global sampler here and to record some of these performances. So here we have some pretty aggressive distortion, mainly on the high end, also a little bit of the low end. And we have decap on punish mode, which just completely destroys the sound. So I rendered that out, and as you can see, like the waveforms, like they just look like bricks at this point. With distortion plugins, you lose a lot of the low end. So here it's just a bit more bass XXL to kind of bring that back in, as well as some filter freak to kind of add a bit more movement. I felt like it didn't really work that well, so there's a bit more processing than I usually do when it comes to like the editing stage. Mainly we have flanger here to give it that nice tonality. It can also help accentuate that robot's moving from left to right. On the track level, we have M Harmonizer, which is a chorus plugin here, some EQ to get rid of some muddiness as well as some noise. I use that fire sound in different places. You know, this is the sound when the robot comes to a stop. Same thing with this sound. I just added an enforcer to add a slight transient in that specific moment. Cool. So since we talked a little bit about the fire sound, I wanted to talk a little bit of the paper towel. Almost kind of sounds like electrical sparks, and I thought that it could complement that main fire layer pretty well. So here we have some spectral denoising, adding some of that low end back in, as well as increasing some of the aggression. HD1000, Oxford inflator, limiter, Rensider. This is just distortion. I wanted to experiment with a different distortion plugin and see what kind of results I would get. My conclusion is that this sounds more analog and dirty when compared to Saturn. Some phase mistress here. Cool, we rendered that out. When I was working on this, I listened to some of these takes. Oh, and I really liked how this one sounded. So I was like, okay, wait, what if I make this into a transient? Like this could be the tail of it, and I could add like a hit with enforcer. So yeah, we got some pretty aggressive hits here, as well as some pretty cool kind of electric spark sounds. I used it in a supplementary transient. So here's kind of what all the transients sound like. And I also used some of the paper towel sounds here. And I think a little bit over here. And before I move any further, I realized that I missed an important element of the charge up, and this was actually the washing machine. I just drew in the envelope to manually add tremolation, as well as drawing in the pitch envelope so it will rise over time. And that is something that you can do with tonal layers that are very static. In addition to that, there's also this vacuum cleaner sound. And this is the same thing, it was just pitched up by a lot, 24 semitones, with some pretty aggressive tremolation here as well. So now that we've gone over all the different layers from the source material that I recorded, I now want to talk about that tiger roar layer that you heard at the start. There's something really special about the natural tonality in a animal roar that cannot be replicated by any other method. I really like to use animal roars as layers to spell impact. It could be a sword impact or anything really that can help make it feel more unique and special. I found with this recording, while it's a very nicely recorded sound, I didn't want it to be immediately recognizable as a tiger sample. So the processing here is just to make it a bit more unique, give it a bit more movement, grittiness. So yeah, first right off the bat, we have some Devil Lock Deluxe. And then we have some M ratio to get rid of some of the noise. With this one plugin alone, you kind of already hear like there's like this tonality in there that's really cool. But it feels low pass, so the next two plugins, the Sonic Maximizer, to kind of bring out some of that high end back in. Like you see how like there's like that really cool tonal tail in here? Then we have some tremolator to give it more movement. And then some flanger and some limiting. So maybe with some of these other takes, it's not that usable, but with this one specifically, as well as this one here, you see like there's that really cool tonal movement in the tail. So we have it first here. And you're probably thinking, oh, it sounds more aggressive than what I previously just shared. And that is because there's some slight pitch modulation. This is what it sounds like without that tiger roar layer. So it's cool, like it's a cool sound, but it feels very just generic. Like it's a cool thruster sound, but it doesn't sound unique. So through adding this one layer, like take a listen to how it sounds like. Kind of almost gives it some life. The same thing kind of goes with that sudden stop movement here, drawing into pitch envelope as well. So without it, there's also some additional layers here. There's a bit more of that tiger here as well. Again, it's the same idea here. It works, you know, it sounds like a fire duster, but, you know, just to give it a bit more interest and extra layer of tonality. Now, back to the start of the charge up. Here we have another use of the tiger layer. This is the original file. And the idea behind this was there's a lot of layers that's pitching up in this charge up. And what I've learned about charge ups is if you have some layers pitching up and some layers pitching down, it sounds a lot more complex because of the inherent pitch modulation between the different layers. So with this, I was trying to add that pitching down layer and see if it actually adds anything to the sound. Here's kind of what it sounds like. It's a very subtle difference, but it doesn't sound so much on the nose. You know, you have a bit of that pitching down movement, pitching up movement. I also drew in the envelope as well as have it pitched down. It's the same thing as tremolation, but I found that drawing it in kind of gives you better control. Transgressor accentuates the transients and some EQ. So yeah, that's kind of all the different layers that was used in this redesign. Now, just to talk a little bit of the bus effects. On the master here, I have T-Rec 1, which is like a good mastering processing unit. There's a bit of GoFos, which is like this intelligent EQ that does automatic adjustments to the tonal balance across the frequency spectrum. OTT, some multiband to tame some of like subharmonic frequencies, and finally some limiting. Notice there's also serum effects on the charge up here, and this is for stereo widening purposes. Versus Pretty subtle, but I feel like this adds a little bit of some of that clarity in the mix. There's not much bus processing here. I think there's a little bit of transient shaping just to have it cut through the mix a bit more. It looks like there's not any other plugins on the group parent tracks here. To wrap this video up, the one major takeaway is to experiment with unconventional sources. There's not a single jet engine rocket thruster that has animalistic elements, but because we are sound designers, we have the flexibility to graph from different sources. It's really limitless in terms of the possibilities that you can kind of experiment with, and this exact same principle can be applied to many different things as well, which is pretty sick. Yeah, with that being said, let me just play through the redesign one last time. Thank you guys so much for watching and for sticking with me until the very end. Please feel free to leave a comment if you have any questions. I'm more than happy to provide further explanation or just breakdowns if that's something you guys are interested in. And yeah, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.